This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Te Motu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations, a show about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, and our complex relationship with art and entertainment. My name's Hugh, I'm the host, and I'd like to put in a very mild content warning for this show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good. But sometimes there are aspects to the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Read the episode descriptions for more information and do be aware of your listening environment. Hello and welcome once again to another episode of Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash and complicated art, and I am joined today by Serena. Good afternoon, Serena. How are you going?
Hello, I'm alright.
Wonderful. Now, the reason that you're here in particular is partly because I've been following your art on Instagram since my family proposed to buy me one of your t-shirts for Christmas. So, that's probably already happened the way that these things work. But also because you had this kind of conversation about censorship and how it worked, and that seemed like an interesting thing to get into, because censorship is one of those topics where people can have quite unnuanced opinions that are perhaps not super helpful. So I guess a good point to start from, I guess, is like what's your take on it, and how did you start becoming concerned about it as a thing?
Or I guess I don't think I'm particularly concerned about it for the most part. It's just like one of those little annoying things where you're kind of like, does this really have to be like this? And it mainly popped up with using different social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook. I'm pretty sure like the same people anyway.
Yeah, from memory, Facebook owns Instagram these days.
I'm quite certain that's the case. But like, you show a nipple on there, like a realistic female nipple, and your post is gone. And I think that's a little bit iffy, because I don't think that we should be censoring like to that extent.
Yeah, and I mean it's particularly difficult on Facebook because Facebook owned platforms, because as you were saying before we hit the record button, a lot of your art is of nude women.
Yes.
Or women adjacent beings.
Yeah,
and so, there's a lot of artistically rendered female nipples that come up on your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
And Instagram, for whatever reason, doesn't have a problem with cartoon nipples. That's fine.
For the most part, I think if you're fairly popular, you might get noticed for having a bare nip here and there. But at the moment, because I'm pretty small, I think I'm managing to just kind of slide under the radar, so my unsheathed titties and my drawings don't matter.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely advantages to operating at a smaller scale. That way, I do music stuff in my spare time, and I definitely got away with some like not kosher sampling in my early electronic stuff that I put up on the internet, just because no one's really paying attention. So you can do the stuff and no one's going to come around and go, you stole my. I get the other thing that I wanted to say about censorship, particularly on Facebook adjacent platforms, is that, the thing about if you draw it, it's fine is definitely weird. The thing that I find more concerning is that there are all of these like groups about like no Muslims in New Zealand, or even less hatefully, more innocuously. You probably don't get this because you're a younger female identified person, but I'm a nearly 40-year-old dude, and demographic targeting means that as a result of that, I get a huge amount of friend requests from like obvious sex bots on Facebook.
Oh yes.
just like photos of generically attractive women, probably stock photos or stolen from a porn site, and then if you click through to the profile, it's all just like links to sex streams.
Yeah, or like something that's definitely totally giving your computer a virus.
Yeah, that's the one. And so, at the same time as they're saying that you can't, for artistic, or actually, I'm friends with a lot of kind of hippie dip types who want to talk about breastfeeding, for example.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, you can't have exposed real female presenting nipples, but hate groups and obvious sex bots
are
for
getting
some reason
on there.
Yeah.
Because I even get hit with sex bots mainly on Instagram, or like people making entire group chats, and I have no idea who they are, but they're sending the same thing to a bunch of us, and I'm like, I don't care. I got excited thinking you wanted to like commission me. I don't care about like your genitalia.
I mean, I guess I understand why those people are doing that, which is it's a long tail thing. If they send out 1 million of them and they get 2,000 people out of 1 million, that's a very tiny percentage, but the money they'll get from that will make it worth it.
It's still a lot of people.
But it does seem like those kind of censorship standards are applied very inconsistently, and that's definitely a concern.
I think it's like, I understand there's a very big difference between porn and nudity, and I personally think that nudity in itself is not a bad thing, and that there should be a lot less stigma around the nude body, and it's sites not letting you define that difference, which I don't think helps break down the stigma. Like, if you went onto Facebook and you casually saw some, like, chick with her tits out, not in a sexual way, just because maybe it's too hot to wear a top that day, it would bring that stigma down in real life, and hopefully it would help lead to making people more comfortable to breastfeed in public and stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's a particular problem. We're just going to continue bagging on Facebook because it's fun. But I think
it's the easy target.
Yeah, I think there's a particular problem there, which is that a lot of these social media platforms, we'll broaden it to social media and stop just picking on Facebook. A lot of these social media platforms want their moderation, and I do think they need moderation of some sort. I think that's a reasonably uncontroversial thing to say. But they want all of their moderation to be done as much as possible by robots. Which
makes a really big issues when stuff starts coming up.
Well, exactly, because, I mean, you were saying that there's a difference. You were saying that there's a difference between nudity and pornography, and I agree with that. But I also think that there are people who, for both artistic and artistic trolling reasons, like deliberately fudge that line in order to get a particular effect. And I think that that's, a valid artistic thing to do. But it's also the sort of distinction that you cannot realistically expect a robot to make.
Yeah, which is why I feel like it would be really cool if platforms could get in admin teams whose entire job is just to keep scrolling through everything and actually look at everything and go, is this actually bad? Can this be on the platform? Doesn't matter. And I feel like that might help because like Facebook page admins seem to do a better job at keeping control of their pages than big website people, to be honest.
No, I think you're entirely right. Although it does raise a labor issue essentially, which is that at the moment there are humans whose job is to review things that are reported on Facebook. Yeah. But because Facebook is Facebook and this is 2020, these are essentially like horribly underpaid, effectively call center workers who just spend like 12 hours a day for starvation wages just looking at the worst stuff that people put on Facebook and deciding whether or not to put the ban button on it. And so I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, because the best places I've had discussions on the internet have been places with really good moderation policies and really active admins. But also, if you're getting Mark Zuckerberg to do that, he's going to organize it in like the most evil way you can imagine.
Yeah, oh no. They need to find some niceness, and then they can like go forward and people like them a lot more. But like if we jump over to Instagram, I know recently they're tightening some of their terms and conditions and stuff like that. And it's actually made a lot of people jump ship from the platform. So essentially, they're actually slowly killing off their platform by doing this, because a lot of creators' livelihoods are based off of the content they make. And if your website's deeming that inappropriate and not letting you post it, that's their livelihood gone. And it's not even explicitly sexual. It might just be like, look at this top, but if she's showing like too much skin, we better take that post down. So a lot of people have jumped ship or are preparing to, so when they inevitably get taken off that website, they have another platform that they're on. Like most of them have moved to Twitter, because Twitter basically lets you post whatever you want.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, we kind of have to put words in these people's mouths because they're not going to talk to us. But But the presumed intention here is something to do with making their platform safer for a particular implied group of people.
It's like that family-friendly, kid-safe area.
But, I mean, firstly, you can say not everywhere needs to be that. And secondly, in some ways, they make things less safe by applying these sorts of standards. I'm thinking of what happened to Tumblr because Tumblr notoriously applied a much more significant standard of censorship than they had done.
And their platform's now dead.
and so their platform was hugely depopulated, but also there were a lot of communities that were using Tumblr as a sort of home on the internet, who were then dispersed across the globe. And a lot of those people ended up in places where, for whatever reason, they needed to have discussions that fell outside of those censorship rules, and that pushed them into much more dangerous spaces, because at the moment, deregulation on the internet seems to go along with like tolerance for Nazis, which is a real worry.
I think what would be really good is if, instead of being so worried about being like kid friendly, because at the end of the day the internet is an adult space with kids sections cut out into it, is if they gave creators and people a bit more handle on their profiles. So like give them an option to make their page 18 plus. So anyone, because they all have every website that you make an account on has your birthday and like when you were born, so they know how old you are. If you're not old enough, you just can't follow that person. And then they can post their maybe slightly more obscene stuff. So like some of it does fall onto the creators, but like giving them the tools to make it more safe instead of just kicking them from a platform entirely would be better.
Yeah, I think so. I think also, and this is perhaps an unpopular point of view, but, I have children and I still hold this point of view. Like, there is no bulletproof solution to a bright kid who really wants to see something that they're not supposed to.
No.
For a long time, adult sites used credit cards not only as payment but as age verification because you needed a particular age to get one. But you can steal your parents' credit card. If you really want to, you can. You can lie about your age to get on Facebook. You can lie about your age to get on these other services.
I know when I was little, I lied about my age so I could have a Facebook because all of my friends had a Facebook. And, like, the more raunchy sites that give you the "Are you 18" message, that's only there to protect them, because if you say you are, they can't get in trouble for you being on there.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're using, a family computer, for example, I don't know if that's a thing anymore. It was when I was of an age. But if you're using a communal computer, then there's no way of proving who clicked yes, I'm 18. If the household includes people who are and who are not, then
no one really wants to admit to going there and doing that to their family.
that's right. But and the site has zero way of telling, so they are covered from their point of view.
I think that's where like your parents or like the people looking after you need to come into it and make sure that like the kid's getting a proper education on all of this stuff, because they're eventually going to see it anyway. So knowing that they at least have knowledge about it and can be safe about it is far better than just trying to block it out entirely and not letting them know.
Oh, definitely. And there's a concept that I mean, there might be a proper technical term for the concept, but I was having a discussion with my brother for this show, in fact, about the book Lost Girls. Are you familiar with Lost Girls?
No,
okay.
Sorry.
So you know who Alan Moore is?
No.
Okay. Do you know the like cavalier mask that you see people wear at protests, like the smiley mask with the beard?
Oh, yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's from a book called V for Vendetta. That was written by a guy called Alan Moore, who is an English comics writer. He did a quite controversial book with his wife, which is called Lost Girls, and it's essentially a husband-wife, very beautifully drawn porn collaboration. And the reason that it was particularly controversial was that the characters are revealed to be, over the course of the story, Alice in Wonderland, Wendy from Peter Pan, and Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, telling each other these stories about their sexual experiences that they've had, which you can imagine ruffled feathers.
That's kind of wild.
Yes. Yeah. So in the course of discussing that with my brother, I was talking about this idea of like porn space or porn reality, or the idea is anyway that what you're portraying is like deliberately and consciously a fantasy. It's not a real thing.
Yeah.
And you can responsibly say this is a fantasy and not a real thing, and you shouldn't aspire to have it be like a really real thing.
Yeah.
Which means that you can explore things that people have in their fantasy lives, and you can depict those without endorsing them as real things that ought to happen. So this was a long way of getting around to like one of the big problems that sex educators are talking about is that kids are getting access to porn younger and younger, and porn is art. It might or might not be good art, but it's art, and it's art intended to portray a particular fantasy, not the way that real people really have sex. And if you don't have the context to understand the difference between those things, then you can end up thinking a lot of really awful, toxic stuff.
That reminds me I think a while back, it was either on New Zealand or I think it was a New Zealand ad, but it kind of tackled this issue a little bit.
I know exactly the one you're talking about.
Where there's a knock on the door and mum opens it to like two porn stars and they're like, hey, did you know like your 10-year-old's been watching us? You need to tell him that this is not how a real relationship works, and like have a bit of a talk with him. And I was like, yes, this is how we should be looking at these things. Don't shame people for enjoying it, but like make sure they're educated enough to understand that it's not realistic, and it is just fair for you to like have a little bit of fun with for a moment and then like go on.
No, definitely, and that the idea that you can discuss having a particular fantasy desire without that having to be a real desire, and all of those different things. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I feel like like blanket censorship can make it much harder to have those kinds of conversations, because it's much harder to say, okay, well, here's a thing, but here's what it's actually like, when you can't get access to the thing that you're trying to describe it with.
Even galleries sometimes. Like, one of the galleries, I was in like a group exhibition almost, but my art didn't end up going up because I think there was a bit of fear and stigma around the fact that I had basically anorectic in the painting and you could see it. And lots of people were like, what about the kids? What if they see it? We have 4-year-olds come into here. And I'm like, well, first off, it's an art gallery. And the nude body, not quite like that because it was more of a surreal take. But the nude body has been portrayed throughout art for centuries and centuries. You go into any museum with like real old proper statues and stuff, you're going to see a pee-pee. And even then, my mum, who works with like small children in kindergartens and stuff, she was like, they wouldn't care about it because their interaction with that image is, oh, he's a boy like me because he has the same parts I have, or he's a boy and I'm not like him because I have different parts, because like the understanding of anatomy is still at that stage of they're like me or not.
Also, I mean, Morris Sendak got there before you in the 1970s, I think. Because he's Mr. Where the Wild Things Are.
Oh, yeah.
He did a fantastic book for small kids called In the Night Kitchen, which is about a little boy who has a dream that involves like flying a plane made out of cake batter. It's super weird and surreal and like just like total small child dream logic. But also there's a bit where he falls into the milk that they're going to use for the cake. And he's naked at that point. And you can see his penis. And Morris Sendak was an author-illustrator, so he did the whole thing himself. It's entirely his thing. And, it was somewhat controversial, but you can still get the book. It's in the library right now, I bet. And it's for small children. And it's not in any way sexualized. It's just like his clothes come off, so he's naked because...
That's what it looks like if you're naked.
And it would be gross if he went in the milk in his pajamas.
Yeah.
Presumably.
Or then you got yucky pajamas when he gets out of it. But it's just this weird stigma around nudity that I'd really like to see broken down. And I think that's one of the reasons I like drawing people mainly in the nude. And it is mainly the female figure because that's just what I enjoy most to draw. But I like to think it helps. It probably isn't doing much, but at least it's something fun, and you are kind of pushing and being like, maybe we don't have to be so scared of this, because everyone's the same when we get down to it. I
mean, if I can give you what I hope is a compliment about your art, I think one of the things that maybe does that with your art that's more... classical depictions of nudes don't quite so much, is that you have this very vibrant, cartoony style with a lot of the things that you do, which means that it's very accessible to people. You don't look at it and you think, oh well, this isn't necessarily for me. This is remarkably highbrow and erudite, and I can't possibly understand all of the symbolism. This is very very direct and consumable and friendly to people, and yet it does have the nudity, and also you depict bodies in a quite an unidealized way sometimes, which is again that's refreshing.
Thank you. I do accentuate the parts I quite like, so all of my ladies have quite large hips and thick thighs. But I think they look quite squishy, so they are a little bit more away from, like, the standardized idea. And, I like playing with the squishiness of them.
Well, I mean, that's of course, one of the great privileges of that kind of cartoonier style, is that everything gets squishier and squishier as you kind of get further into it.
Another thing I like to think is, as older generations kind of in nice-ish terms, stop existing a bit.
Yeah.
I think things will become a bit more accepted because you have, like, my generation and everyone coming after me who are getting more and more, why don't we just accept this stuff? So I'm hoping that as time goes on, like, there's always going to be some of it, but it will become less of, like, a taboo topic.
Yeah, I think so. I think also, I mean, we have a quite unusual situation. You know, a lot of stuff got culturally kind of dynamited in the 1960s and the 1970s by sheer demographic weight. You know, the baby boomers are called boomers because there was an actual boom of babies, and you can track it through. And that kind of demographic weight has meant that whatever cultural standard they eventually settled on was quite hard to shake for us less populous generations that come after. But I think there is truth to that. I think there is. All right. Well, look, this is a fascinating conversation. We will continue it very shortly. I am talking to Serena, who is an artist here in Palmerston North, about the topic of censorship and how one deals with that. We are going to take a brief break, and we'll be back right after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
You're listening to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash and complicated art, and today I am talking to Serena, who is a local artist here in Palmerston North, about censorship and how we deal with it and what it does. And I guess a thing that I would like to maybe kind of a direction that might be interesting to steer the conversation is that censorship does, like, it comes from a place of kind of social control and things, but it is sometimes a marker of stuff that needs to be handled with caution. We were talking about before the break about being able to have conversations with people about like sexual fantasy and the difference between that and reality, and the difficulty that you have when people kind of encounter that as their sex education without having that done through school first. Another example I would talk about is and this is in my head because I've been listening to a podcast about it, but is the book Lolita, which is an account of the sexual abuse of a child from the perspective of the perpetrator. But, and here's the very important but, the book starts with a very clear preface which says you're about to read an account by a very bad person who wrote it while he was in jail awaiting trial with the specific intention of trying to convince a jury that he was actually a very good person and quite badly misunderstood. So he's lying to you all the time and you have to watch out for it. And that's a thing that subsequent movie adaptations have had a really hard time with. They kind of accept his perspective and kind of sexualize the person that he's abusing, in the way that he does without questioning it. And I guess the question I'm kind of trying to get round to is with things like Lolita or like people trying to learn sex ed from porn where it can be quite dangerous if there's no guidance. Is there a way that is not just censorship that we can somehow like flag these things as like warning, caution, high voltage, you know?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a way, and it's just like doing just that, is putting a warning before the content and going, hey, here's what's in it. You might not like it. Like, be aware of that. And when it comes to like, I think movies might be the easiest to use in like the descriptions, is like you can go online and read about a movie and get people's thoughts and like find out what's in it before you even touch the movie itself. And I think that can be applied to just about anywhere. So like on sites like Instagram, even when stuff's censored because it is getting a bit raunchy and rude, a lot of artists generally put not safe for work on the front panel. So you have to scroll purposely through the pictures before you can actually get to that raunchy stuff. And I think if you just kind of apply that, then you don't have to worry so much, because like people are then making the choice to go look at it. And maybe also introducing, I'm not sure if it was Tumblr, but I know one of the sites one of my mates uses, it lets you ban tags, and because tags are how you make sure people see your content. And if you ban a tag, it's because you don't want to see content associated with that. So say if you've got children that you don't want seeing certain things, you can go, I don't want them seeing like a nude breast, so I'm going to tag anything that might relate to that. And you can go through and you could cancel all those tags and find ways around it, so you can still help to get rid of it, kind of.
So you're essentially suggesting a model, particularly on the internet, where you hand that control to people who are consumers, for want of a better term. Yeah. You're saying here is a much more granular way of customizing the experience that you're going to have if you interact with this site. That's really interesting. I guess the issue is that once again it does rely on creators being responsible.
Yeah, so a lot of this does fall onto the creators, but at the same time, the sites have to be able to give them that chance, kind of, because right now they're just being kind of booted from the systems.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say it also presents something of a problem when it comes to historical material. So Lolita was written, I think, in the 1950s. I might be wrong about that. I have a very bad head for dates. But, Lovecraft, if I remember rightly, is very nearly into being public domain because it's so old. Because he was like dawn of the 20th century, he was writing his stuff.
Well, you can find Lovecraft stuff like everywhere. Go into a bookstore and chances are they have something.
That's the one.
I'm quite a fan of him because of what he's done for horror, and because like horror's my big thing, and it wouldn't be where it is today if it weren't for his ideas and what he put out there. Even if people don't like his stuff, you can't deny his effect he's had on media.
Oh, no, definitely. but also when it comes to Lovecraft, he's someone who you definitely need to take quite a critical stance with if you're going to read him, because just spectacularly racist, even by the standards of the time.
Oh, yeah. And he wasn't a good person.
No, an awful person. And the reason that that's a problem is not because, he named his own cat and the cat of one of his characters the N-word. It's because that attitude of there are superior and inferior races and you can prove it with science and the inferior ones will corrupt the superior ones. That's baked into some of his stories at such a fundamental level that one of the things that it's clear that he's really afraid of is this idea of being corrupted and lowered somehow. And you kind of have to know that going in a bit, I feel like, with Lovecraft.
I think that's true of a lot of content creators. I think the older ones, it's a lot more present because as you go further back, there was just so much racism, and a lot of things that were okay then are very much not okay now.
Oh, no.
And I think that's something lots of people have to try and remember and understand when they go and look at these older works.
Yeah, definitely. I was raised on the Just So stories because my mum was kind of entranced by the language and they will just hypnotize small children because they've got this kind of lyrical rhythm to them.
Yeah.
But also, if you go through the book, you just have to not not touch some of the stories because they are very bad indeed, because Rudyard Kipling was a colonialist with a big C who was interested in promoting colonialism as like the best thing.
Yeah.
He actually wrote the poem called The White Man's Burden. And again, that bleeds through, and you need to be able to have a responsible stance with that. Not that, of course, that Rudyard Kipling was ever censored, because, you know, things that just promote colonialism don't tend to be. So I guess we're advocating for people to read responsibly. I think horror is maybe an interesting direction to go in as well. Because
I've got some opinions here.
Good. I want them. So here is a thing that maybe elicits some opinions. That talking about responsible consumption and letting people know what they're in for and all of that sort of thing is all very well, but also horror is media which is often, not always, but often deliberately designed to upset the audience in a number of ways. And it's not always straightforward fear. You know, sometimes there is horror where the goal is to make you like uncomfortable. And people creating that responsibly is a very interesting challenge, I think.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to horror, because I think to start off with, it's not a very loved genre. Like, you know, you have a selection of people who are like horror buffs and will enjoy it, or else you just don't like it. You kind of might even just hate it full out, which is fair. Like, it is very much, its goal and purpose is there to try and scare you or make you uncomfortable. And that's where all the subgenres come in, because you can, it's like pick your poison, what's going to make you scared or cry or like hurt the most if you watch it. But there's actually quite a lot of censorship in horror, not coming from the creators, because like the people who think of it want to put it out there, but countries ban stuff. So some films are just banned outright in countries, and this probably applies to a lot of other genres too, but horror's the one I know about. And even cut scenes, like I know in Hostel, the second one, New Zealand and Australia, I'm pretty sure, cut some scenes from it. And me as a viewer who is an avid horror buff and I know what I'm getting into, I was really upset that I'm missing out on content because a small group of people in a room decided, no, I don't think I want people to get to see this. Like, I think if you're really worried about it, they should do kind of what we were talking about before and put a warning, or even if you bring in a higher restriction. So like, I don't know, the brain stops maturing at like 25 or something like that, right? Make the restriction 25, because by that point you should be old enough to understand what you're getting into, and with an extra warning on like the case or before you watch it, it gives you a chance to go, maybe I shouldn't watch this, or maybe I should look into it before I watch it. And then at the end of the day, if it is too much, you can stop it, you can turn it off. And that's it. No one's making you watch it or see these things.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think also, you know, people who are, not to put a fine point on it, not very intelligent, make a lot of noise about people being very sensitive. But I think that there's utility in that, because it can be about learning what your limits and your tastes are, and that can be really important when you're dealing with, you know, media that's trying to push your buttons. And also, I think having people who make decisions around kind of classification, who are knowledgeable on what they're talking about, it becomes really important as well. My favorite example of a particularly wild time in media consumption in New Zealand is sort of the mid through late 90s. Because what had happened was that there was the boom in anime driven by Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
And so there was this massive appetite for it. So people were starting to ship it in, but no one had any idea what anything was. And it was cartoons, so stuff would just get filed into the cartoon section in the video store.
It can't be bad if it's a cartoon. They're for children.
Exactly. I had to fish copies of Legend of the Overfiend, which is a notorious, quite violent as well as very sexual anime. OVA is the technical term. Out of the children's section and put it in other places when I was going around video stores because it's cartoons, so which is clearly for children.
Which is an assumption that's luckily been torn down a little bit more by like today now, but I think that's still there too as they go, oh, it's a cartoon. They can watch it when it's very, like, animation is quite often for adults just as much as it is for kids.
Yeah, I think so, and I mean, you know, that wouldn't have been a problem in Japan where animation is considered just kind of a way you can do things, and you can have like animated porn, you can have animated instruction manuals, you can have animated like safety videos for workplaces, and it's just like a medium that you can use to do whatever the thing is that you want to do. The other thing that I was thinking of was that the other dot I guess I would join between horror and anime is that they're kind of they have a history of being considered low art, which means that a lot of the kind of wild stuff that you get in those overarching, I can't really call anime's sort of a genre now, I suppose. But like a lot of the wild stuff that you get there comes from the fact that there isn't the same kind of corporate supervision as you would get if you were making the next Marvel movie.
Yeah, no.
So the next Marvel movie couldn't be about just to rip off the premise of an actual horror movie that exists, about the idea that someone created a parallel race of human beings who live under the ground in subterranean tunnels feeding on raw rabbits as an attempt to remote control people who they were twinned with on our Earth. And then that experiment failed, so those people were just abandoned and left there.
It's actually an amazing movie.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
The way. Us is great.
Yeah, everyone should go watch Us. But like, you couldn't do that in a Marvel movie.
No,
because
you couldn't.
The entire premise is too wild. But you can do that in horror because the level of supervision is not as strict to take it.
They expect it to go places like that. Like, your audience there is expecting you to do something like that. Yeah. I find too.
Yeah. Definitely. And by the same token, to take like a very old anime that I love, you couldn't in Western children's animation in the 90s go, we're going to create a giant robot show, and halfway through it's going to pivot to being about the trauma of war on child soldiers and become an increasingly intense examination of their personal psychology until the world literally ends in a kind of psychedelic apocalypse involving giant nude women. But that's Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is, again, people should go and watch it. You know, you can get away with wild stuff when you are considered to be somehow a lesser art form. And I think there is advantages in that in some ways.
Yeah, no, I think it's because it's not as recognized, it gets away with so much, which means people like us who do enjoy it are able to actually enjoy it more. And then you can kind of also see the cash grabs when they come up and you're like, this was really just here because Halloween's coming up and they want a spooky movie in the theatre.
I think there's a sort of a I guess they talk in oceanography about the concept of pumps, you know, like processes that move things from one place to another. There is a sort of like a cultural pump effect as well. You could argue where stuff that is quite wild will start to bleed into the acceptable edges of the mainstream, and so you can have like quite respectable, finger quotes, respectable journalists were talking about like how important and deep the Babadook was, for example.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of bled through enough into mainstream culture that it's kind of allowed to arrive and be about something in that way.
No, I do enjoy seeing the stuff become a bit more mainstream and then watching everyone react to it and kind of flock to it. That's always kind of interesting to see. And I don't know, again, opinions, but a lot of the time it seems to happen with not the best movies out of what they could be going on about. But I think that just comes down to a lot more personal preference than anything.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think you could make a food analogy maybe, like if you like curry, then you really want your curry to taste like curry. But if you were going to introduce someone who like only ever had the most pies and sausage rolls type Kiwi food ever to curry, you would probably start them off with something a bit milder just so their head doesn't explode.
Chicken pie.
Yeah, that's the one. And so, the things that get the big mainstream breakthroughs are always, to some degree, kind of going to be the butter chicken pies of whatever the medium is. And that's probably unavoidable.
No.
So, continuing with this idea, then, how would you suggest, if someone's been listening to this conversation and they've started thinking, "Gosh, I could do with the borders of my artistic world in terms of what I like." I could do with those expanding. I could do with finding out what I like. How would you suggest that someone approach that responsibly? Because I'm of the generation who my dad bought our first computer when I was like 4, and that was a Commodore 64. And by the time I was a teenager, I was on the internet, and so I did that rapid transition and hit the internet when it was actually the Wild West, and I saw things I categorically should not have seen. Similarly with the explosion of anime into popular culture, definitely things that I should have waited before I exposed myself to, but no one knew what they were doing, and so there was no kind of oversight of that stuff at that point. How would you suggest that people now, with better tools, more safely and responsibly do that stuff?
I guess if you're ever really worried about something, it just kind of comes down to doing the research before you dive headfirst into it. So if you want to watch a movie, maybe look into it before you watch it to see if you actually do want to watch it in the end. And if you're looking for an artist who pushes the boundaries, just keep scrolling through feeds, look through different artists that an artist you like is following. That's kind of a good way, because if you like someone's art, chances are you might like their taste in other art as well. And then if you find someone you like, you can follow them. And if you don't like them, well, you don't even have to block them. If it's something like Instagram, you just don't follow them and you're never going to see stuff from them again.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I think also I'm going to sound a note of caution, which is that because the internet amplifies everyone more or less equally, there is an ecosystem of people who exist to say that art is bad because it transgresses against some nebulous concept of Western ideals. And if anyone says anything that sounds even remotely like that, they're probably lying to you. So watch out for that, for one. I was also going to make a suggestion, which is that there are people who make what you would consider, I suppose, reasonably mainstream art, but they'll also do fringier things.
Yes,
that's particularly common with people who publish on the web. They will have like, here's my safe for work things that I do.
And here's all my porn.
My porn, or here's the like adult commissions that I've done for people, or here's my comics, but here's my high art. Like people often do everything all at once.
To be very honest, a lot of artists find their income through drawing the raunchier stuff because that's where your clientele is more willing to pay. So being aware that they might have separate accounts or separate places for that. And most of the time, those accounts will be labeled somehow, and like the little descriptions, there'll be like a 18 plus sign, or they'll say like no one under this age, and then, or even just a not safe for work warning, and just to pay heed to those, and also talk to people. There are lots of communities and pages, so you can talk to those who might know a little bit more than you or have the same interests as you, and it's a really good way to like expand your knowledge on what's around you and what you might enjoy and stuff.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you for coming and talking. We are coming up rapidly to time, so there are two things I like to do at the end of the show. The first is to ask you if you have any specific recommendations. So if people have found this conversation interesting, are there like particular works of art or fiction or music or whatever that you reckon people should go and check out because they're a good or interesting or illustrative introduction to stuff?
I don't know. I think for the art, again, it's just looking into creators and stuff. And I guess if you do want good horror movies that aren't heavy on gore, check out Us, like we mentioned before, or Hereditary, which is a newish one. Very psychological and absolutely amazing.
Did you like Midsummer?
I haven't watched that one.
I haven't seen
yet.
Midsummer.
That's the one with like the chick and the flowers and stuff.
Yes. It's a daytime folk horror. I really liked it, but there is a very deliberate and deliberately unpleasant undercurrent that I didn't spot when I watched it that I kind of later read up on.
I've heard about it.
So I would say with Midsummer, definitely do some reading around it first because it will deepen your sense of what's going on.
That is something, if you're ever wanting to look into horror a bit more, there's a YouTuber, I think his name's Ryan Hollinger.
Yes, that name sounds familiar.
He does very good in-depth analysis of movies, and I think one that might actually apply a little bit well to our conversation today is his review of Possum, which is like a horror movie, and all I know is what I've seen on his review, but you follow a guy and his caregiver had been abusing him, and it hints at stuff like he stands outside the school, and it's very creepy looking because it's this grown man looking at it at like a primary school, and he gets sent away, and there's lots of undertones and stuff, and I think that's where that might be a really good one to look into if you're interested in like maybe ideas around censorship and points of view and stuff like that. Excellent.
So I had kind of three suggestions, none of which have anything to do with censorship, but I just think that they walk interesting lines in interesting ways. So if you have kids, I would recommend checking out with them Steven Universe and the remake of She-Ra, because both of those series do really interesting stuff around normalizing conversations about like sex and gender identity while being like 100% at the kids level, but doing some really interesting stuff. Like Steven Universe does some really interesting stuff about using like fantasy type anime style body transformations as a metaphor for other ways that people's bodies can change. And that's really interesting. The other thing that I would recommend is there's a series, I believe it's still on Netflix, called Glow, which is the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. It's a comedy series about a wrestling promotion, like a really cheesy sexed up wrestling promotion for women in the 1980s. And it does a really interesting thing which I think is relevant because we were kind of talking about how you responsibly deal with like horrible books by horrible people. It does a really interesting job of letting its 80s characters have really awful 80s attitudes, but not quite ever apologizing for them. So you see these people say and do dreadful things, but it's not, and it comes off as natural, but it doesn't come off as the movie somehow going wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You couldn't get away with that these days. And I think that's very interesting. Also, I'm going to throw in the Haunting of series on Netflix as well. If people haven't seen those, The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, if you like horror that's about things.
Which is quite interesting because I'm pretty sure The Haunting of Hill House, there's a really old movie with the same title.
Yeah, it's because it's based on a novella from like the 50s.
And I haven't seen anything of the old movie apart from a small snippet they showed in another movie, but there was kind of like a comical small amount of misogyny in that there like one scene, and I was like, I kind of want to watch this.
Yeah, it's a study in like fascinating adaptational changes because the series is quite different from the book. But it's kind of trying to do an interesting, different thing for different reasons. Okay, well, we are definitely to time now. Last thing I like to do is plug your shit. What do you have that people can find on the internet? Can they give you money so that they can buy things from you? Where can people find you? What are you doing?
Yes, I'm on most platforms, mainly with my art and selling my art. So you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And my handles are shit, I'm an artist, and that's IMMA because we don't use real grammar here. And I also have a website, which you can find the link on any of those platforms, where you can buy my merchandise, which is like street clothes and art and skateboards and lots of fun stuff.
Fantastic. And also, because it's approaching Christmas time and some people who listen might be Palmerston Northians, are you going to be at any other, like, because I saw your stuff at I forget what its name was, but the market.
Spring Night Market.
Yeah, that's
in
the
downtown.
One in the downtown mall. But have you plans to be at other markets around the area selling stuff?
Actually, I won't be in town in a few days, so I won't actually be there. But for my Palmy peeps, if you do ever see anything you like, because I am in Palmy, if you send me a message in like my Instagram PMs and ask for something, I can arrange maybe dropping it off to you, and it saves on shipping, which I'm sure everyone would appreciate at these tricky times with Christmas and a low-key recession and everything happening.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show is produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. You can find me on the internet at Objective Realty on Twitter, and you can find the show on Facebook under Reserved Recommendations. If you've got a reserved recommendation of your own, feel free to pitch it to me in either of those two places. And if you enjoyed the show, why not go ahead and recommend it to a friend? You can find past episodes at www.mpr.nz/show/reserved on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit radio station. If you enjoy this or any of their other fine audio programming, why not fling them a couple of dollars? Go to mpr.nz/donate for more information.